Bing, 4 p.m. Hello, Adam.
Hello.
Hello. You're usually so early, so I got a bit worried now. How are you doing? You okay?
Well, it is like it is here. And I can't be here all the time because I need to sell some winter tires. So I have a prospective buyer coming in during the call.
Fair enough. From the frozen norths, yes, I understand.
Yep. Suddenly everyone realizes that they want to winter tires, which is good for me when I have some. How are you?
I'm good. We had a meeting with Alan yesterday.
Yeah, I watched that one. Super, very good.
Yeah, it became quite interesting, and a few things were, they came up. One of them is how to look at the community, so I look forward to discussing that today. I'm glad you saw it. Thank you. And the other one is the email I just sent. To do visual meta on the web, actually, all you need is BibTeX. You don't need any of our fancy stuff. Here's Peter as well. But so that should then allow. Okay, so a reference manager is not just for stuff you have, apparently. It's also for books in the library and things like that. So I could imagine, even in your world, what you're building, that a web citation should fit in as well. It looked like a document, but you don't have to have the whole thing there. So interesting. Hi, Peter.
Hello.
So Peter, I expect what you referred to in your email that I'm very grateful for is things to put in the header. Is that right, of the page?
Well, that's the little fragment of JavaScript that you'd need to attach to a button or some other control widget in order to copy the visual meta, which you'd have sitting in a variable in JavaScript, onto the clipboard, and then it would be picked up by author without any problem.
So you are not talking about just copying any text on the page?
No, the text that you want to have copied to the clipboard has to be living in a variable, and that's basically transferring the contents of some arbitrary variable onto the clipboard.
But can't you do that with added stuff? Because I did do this before. When I had my hyperwords thing, you would select text, and then you would choose copy at citation, and that would work. Adam is doing a bit of nodding there.
Yep. So of course you can do get the text selection from the page when you're clicking that button. So and that then it appends the visual meta and the text selection, so you get a richer.
So I'm not. I just realized I'm being very silly. I'm not contradicting you, Peter. In my system, there was a button in effect. It wasn't just a click on a page. Sorry, it wasn't just copy from a page, but that's fine.
I was just trying to answer your very specific question in that. But yeah, you could also have a handler recognize the selected text on the page and do more exotic things. And that would be just basically building whatever was going to be sitting in the VM variable before you push whatever's in that variable off to the clipboard. So that'd just be an extra step to do on top of it.
Yeah, no, this makes perfect sense. So we can do something. We could have something like this on the page, right?
Although I'd phrase it, copy a citation to this article as opposed to copy this article as a citation.
What?
I would say copy a citation to this article as opposed to copy this article as a citation. The copy this article as a citation phrase might confuse some people who aren't familiar with using reference managers. If you're a reference manager user, it makes perfect sense, and that's the way to say it. But if you've never used a reference manager before, the idea is copying a citation would be clearer than copying something as a citation. So copy a citation to this tells you I'm copying the citation. Otherwise, copy this as a citation. There's a little ambiguity inherent in this.
Hi, Alan.
Hello.
Don't want to dwell on this too much. We have many other interesting things, but since I'm just, maybe you saw the email I sent with the screenshot and stuff.
Just taking a look at it.
So yeah, but if you just look here on the screen, the conclusion really is, if we're going to support visual meta on the web, we don't actually have to put any visual meta. It's enough to put the BibTeX. So in this example here, if you look at the screen, if someone drag selects manually the gray stuff and copies it, pastes it into a reference manager, that works. But of course, it's not the most elegant thing to do. That's why we were just talking now of having a button link, whatever, copy this article to paste it, whatever type works. So, and this middle bit here is just, if we're going to show it, we should probably say what it is. But anyway, these are implementation things we can talk about over time. I think the stage we're at is technically, for a user, it's quite easy as long as they know what it is. To put it in a production workflow, it would just have to put the stuff they already have on the page anyway in a different way and stick it at the end in their colophon thing at the whatever at the bottom. Makes sense, right?
And this would work anywhere.
Yeah, well, it depends what you mean by work. Currently, if you copy that gray text and paste it into author, it'll paste it as a citation. If you paste it into a reference manager, it should also paste it as a citation there. So you have it as a reference to use later.
And if I paste it into my notes or text app,
currently, it wouldn't do anything interesting because
I would see the information, right? At least.
Yeah, it would paste as it is there. But I have asked Ben to introduce me to the new people running Google Docs, because I talked to the old. They got a high, seem to be kind of a big draft of people going through that management area. So I've said it would be amazingly powerful if you could copy and paste Visual Meta with Google Docs. So Visual Meta or BibTeX, when it's on the clipboard, is interchangeable. Visual Meta just gives you more. The system doesn't care. So then you could be reading the Atlantic or whatever, copy this, go to your Google Doc, paste it, or paste it with the name, the date, the title, all that stuff automatically.
Something that we do, or I've seen, is when you highlight text, or rather, you can link to something that will resolve on the page and highlight that section of text so that the highlighted text is bound into the link.
Oh yeah, the paragraph level addressability.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that Mark and Chris and I have been working on and doing testing for a very, very long time. That's relatively trivial to do.
Right. Would that be able to work with this? So could I get the citation and the quote or and the highlight, or is it kind of one or the other?
If you do it with my plugin Liquid Words, Hyperwords from way, way back when, yes, that's trivial. Because you select text and you perform an action. The action is with that little dot, click on copy a citation. So my question for Peter and Adam is, if you only select text on a page and do Command-C, you don't click on a button, can you still append Visual Meta to that selected text?
Once upon a time, you could you could do that, but I don't know if browser have changed it, because it was a problem. Someone copied up some code, code online, and suddenly someone else injects something very dangerous, and you paste that into your terminal. So I don't know what the current status of it, but you were, but back in the days, you have had access. There was some sort of event that was triggered when you copied, and you could do something just before it was put on the clipboard.
I just can't remember
Yeah, I think Adam's right. The browsers changed their functionality a while back to try to preclude those kinds of practices. Certainly, if you're like building your own custom browser as an Electron app, you'd be able to go and do whatever you wanted because you could control whatever rights you want. It might be possible for a user to explicitly enable that functionality now. I'm not sure. That starts getting into the hairy world of the security technology, and I haven't been following that.
Well, there's a good point arising in that, because I know Frode knows a guy who does stuff with Google who might be able to ask the right person. In the sense that, okay, so if we want to do this, what is now perceived to be the right way? I'm sure there will be a way. So the question is, I mean, the point is there will be a way, I imagine, but not one that's necessarily well known or well implemented. But if this is another thing pushing on the door of something that is seen to be a reasonable and good implementation, then we're all basically swimming in the same direction, even if it may take a while to fully come to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we could definitely do, and this is where I'm looking at Adam here as doing a lot of, proper things. If we went back and built this little pop-up thing that I had way back when, it's not that hard to build. I didn't spend much money on it. Then we could also interact straight with the things that Adam's doing on the web. So if this thing happened to be on ACM, instantly you can see a timeline for those documents. If it's something that's done for the Atlantic, which a place I love, so I'm glad you got a friend there, Alan, then instantly many things can happen. This is one. Copy this bit of citation, but also search all the articles for something on that. We had the things we had was translate inline for foreign readers. It changed the actual text. That was super cool with Chinese characters. We also had send us emails. It would take the selected text, open an email in the user's email program with the title in the subject and the URL underneath the quote. There are so many cool things that can happen that you get for free once you have a little menu like this.
But would that menu be site specific?
Yes.
Similar to the share on social media menus that appeared.
Yeah, but it selects. It appears when you select text. Let me see if I can find. Oops. Okay. Oh my gosh, 13 years ago, someone made a how to make hyperwords, and I didn't know that. So, right, so, okay, here's a 50-second video. I'll turn the audio off. So this is just Doug on a web page, selecting text. And once he's selected the text, that little dot appears, he points to it, and a menu comes up. Exactly the same design as a control click menu. So now he's going to do a flow view. So it does that, so it's easier to read. If you're concentrating on that bit. So it's just a contextual menu. And the fact that it comes up, that little dot to make it come up means that it is very little, it's not very intrusive, and it doesn't interfere with the normal Command C.
You throw a link to that in the chat?
Just search for hyperwords and YouTube. It's the top. Not trying to be difficult, but it's...
No, that's fine.
Okay. So, okay, I think here you can... that's a bit long. Okay, here's 1 minute and 21 seconds of hyperwords demo. Buffering for some reason. See that blue dot? That's it. So that's a hover. So that's, they can do a million things, and it's an old idea, not that hard to redo, but now we have an infrastructure that may make good use of it.
Well, I mean, isn't much of that now broadly has been sort of adopted into browsers? I mean, the danger of going back to the hyperwords things is just to deal with the VM is now VM is being encumbered with other stuff. I would suggest better is to just find a way to make VM sort of addressable within current browser standards. Otherwise, it's just making more work, and B is an obvious weakness for someone to just come along and said no, it doesn't. It's a different standard or something.
I would say exactly the opposite, Mark, because ideally, yes, it should just be a web standard. These type, visual meta or BibTeX, yes, absolutely, no question. However, in order for it to be usable, the publisher of the site would have to somehow say who the author of the page is. And that's something that's lacking if this is just a browser plugin. But if it's a publisher's plugin, whether it's for WordPress or for a magazine or whatever it is, then they have it in their XML.
So, I mean, I don't get why it has to be a plugin. What I'm saying is, why don't we, rather than just put another thing that you have to go and find, and you have to learn how to use, I think broadly most of what you're showing there.
Mark, are you talking from
10 years later?
No, hang on, to understand, sorry. Are you talking from the user's or the publisher's perspective when you say go and find? So I'm on the same level.
So it's just, why does it, I don't understand why it needs to be a discrete plugin. It should just be some of the information that's generated on the page, because if you're the publisher, you own the creation of that page. So to have a plugin to expose something.
Oh, sorry. Okay, Mark. Okay, misunderstanding. Right. The original hyperwords was either a plugin or on the page. When it's on the page, it is a bit of JavaScript in the header, and that was it.
Well, that's fine. I mean, that's fine, but I think that's the route to go. Right? I just sort of think if the thing has to rest upon another thing that you have to do, it's all friction towards adoption.
From the user, you mean?
Sorry?
From the user, you mean?
Yeah, and to just getting things to a scale where it's accepted. So all my experience just says that however clever it may be, it's probably working as closely as we can within whatever the limitations.
Mark, the user experience would be you go to a page, you find something interesting, you select it. Oh, there's an icon. I tested this for The Economist, CNN, talked to lots of people, and it really worked. In fact, we took it to China, and on the first official NBA, as in the National Basketball Association of China, we built this for them in China.
No, I've seen that. I think I just don't understand. I mean, I think I've stated as clearly as I can.
Mark. So on the NBA websites, what happened was you would select a player name or a team, and a little thing would come up showing the stats for that player or that team. So it was customized for them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you did it on the Economist test page, you would just select text and the Economist icon would come up. If you mouse over that, you get the option to copy a citation. So the idea was that if you're interested in that text and you wanted to cite it anyway, you copy it you select it to copy. So once you select it and you see this extra affordance, which you didn't know about, it's like, oh, well, that's useful. Now I don't have to do all the other stuff. That's why it worked on that level. Anyway,
no, I'm just think we're confusing two things. We were talking about how to put the VM in the page to make it accessible. Now we're talking about the user interaction thing, and I would rather sort of not interleave those two things.
Sure.
I'd rather concentrate on the cleanliness of getting the VM in use. Yeah. And trying to manage the user interaction with it, I think is an unnecessary complication at this point. Good as it, I'm not saying the things you described aren't good, but I just think it's just overcomplication at a point where the main thing is to try and get this.
Mark, to actually, we should talk about. Alan doesn't have the whole hour, so we should talk about the whole community thing mostly. But technically to do this, I had forgotten that I've already done this. So technically it's a piece of pie. Select text, thing comes up, you have many options. One of them is copy citation. So for the user experience, it's easy. Technically to build, it's super easy. So if a publisher wants this, literally all it is a little bit of text, JavaScript in the header, which the only complication is it would include XML about that page so we know who the author is and the date. That's it. Anyway, that's something we can keep working on. Hi, Rafael, glad you're here. So we had a little bit of a meeting yesterday, short notice, talking about community things, which of course you're a huge part of. And Alan started off with the idea for an email newsletter, which is really very interesting. We had lots of ideas around that. What we have decided is to talk to everyone about a few things, but also we're not going to rush into anything. We're probably, and stop me if I'm saying anything wrong here, Alan or Mark, going to announce this on the 9th of December with the launch of the book, and then we may actually start doing this thing early January. So it's not like rush and do a silly job. Alan has wonderfully fascinating ideas, such as specific emails with, anyway, Alan can obviously introduce this in a second, but the point is opening it up a little bit. So we're going a little bit towards deep literacy, tools for thought, and not hammering on text all the time, keeping text separate, but these things together, because it's another entry point to the community. And lastly, before handing over to Alan, the idea was also a little bit inspired by Mark's wife to have weekly exercises. So people are subscribed to this Twitter or email newsletter. There is something like this week, focus on links or whatever it is, and people can somehow contribute a piece of thought to something. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Frode. I didn't really have a lot prepared for the moment, but I'll review what we talked about yesterday. The idea, we just talked about if we had a newsletter, what would it involve? What would be its purpose? What would we want out of it? And I think it led to an interesting conversation for sure. So I'll lay it out. There's a couple of baseline purposes, right? One thing I think can agree on is that whatever it is for a newsletter, we want it to at least start out to be something that's pretty easy to pull off. Not like putting together a book every week, right? Something that can naturally fall out. So what do we want? What do we want its purpose? Various purposes are promote Frode's products, promote future text, the book, the composing, the conversation, or gain an audience and formalize an audience that can be mobilized, a tribe sort of around these topics. Where it comes from is that there's clearly a huge groundswell of interest in tools for thought, personal knowledge management. There's a lot of stuff going on right now, but I think that there's a market, an audience within that is not really being addressed sufficiently. And that can be seen in the kinds of conversations that go on with PKM. There's a lot of like, oh, here's a new tool, here's a new plugin. And there's this excitement, but there's not, if you go one level down, it's kind of barren, which is that one level down is, why do we want to connect these things? Is it, I think for the most vocal audience it's kind of, I'm reading a book and I want to take notes and I want to connect this stuff. And it's almost like the equivalent of CrossFit or something. It's just like an exercise you could take to feel better about yourself, but it doesn't necessarily lead to something. Some of the interesting places that we got to that after talking with Frode and hearing what he wanted out of it, and Mark, was a drumming up of a reawakening of curiosity and the love of literacy, words, text. the future of text as a topic is notoriously, it seems, a difficult thing to talk about once you start to break it open. Are we going to be talking about the future of links? We're going to be talking about the future of texting, open-ended, like distributed? Or are we talking about canonical PDFs and academic papers? It's just all over the place. So approaching it from a, here is the future of text could lead a lot of people astray. But if we had something that was a simple weekly newsletter that was very small morsels, that could just trigger thoughts and interest, then that may gain first an audience, and then we can pull in some of those members of the audience to interact with visual meta more, to use it more, and start to passively kind of understand its value. So some of am I going off track here, Frode and Mark?
I'm just laughing at Peter's comment, Trigg's link type of the week. Yeah, that'll be lasting for a couple of 100 years. No, I think you're right on. The only comment before you continue, since you asked the question, I'm not, you're being very kind and very supportive of my work, and that's very lovely. But I don't think that should be a key thing. If someone, for instance, right now for Future of Text Edition 2, I've asked a few people to help me redo their work in Author, because otherwise it's really, there's a ton of references and they do it in weird ways. That's great. But, I want it to be an open forum for tool makers. The idea with visual meta, and especially the way we talk about BibTech in the Atlantic or whatever, is that it doesn't have to have mine or our brand on it. These are just, things we're actually doing, putting our money where our mouth is. If someone wants to integrate with that, be along the copy-paste chain or whatever, fantastic. If someone has something more interesting, we should equally allow that. Like
Right,
predict the future is to, predict the future is to invent it. That's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to be useful. But just like you said in the beginning, it's not just about another plugin or another tool. So we have to be careful that we then don't suddenly say, use our tool.
Right. Yeah, great. And so picking up from there, one of the things that's difficult, if you go back to As We May Think. Now, I don't currently know whether when that article dropped, if it was a huge deal or if it was kind of, some people were excited and others were like, it's called a file cabinet, bro. What's the problem?
Yeah.
And it only gained reputation over time as we started to finally get these tools that he was talking about way back then. I feel like that's kind of probably the case somewhat. And if that is the case, or even not, it is difficult to think about what may be when we don't have those tools in front of us. And one of the perhaps avenues for this newsletter would be to take the what's implied in Future of Text and take a look back at how things came about that we're now used to, as a method of saying, this is maybe personally what I would like. Let's say when JD Licklider and crew were trying to figure out, okay, we have to do this internet. How are we going to send messages? This is an incredibly difficult problem, and they settled on packets. I'm not necessarily talking about that story because it's incredibly technical, but the frame of mind that they said, here's the problem that's in front of us. What can we draw from to think about a solution in a different way? It's a lot. What's wonderful about these talks that we have is that we all tend to have some kind of awareness of the history of how we got to now. And so maybe drawing on some of those to help a person think differently about the text that we see in front of us today. Then they get excited about what could be possible, right? Because the biggest, I think, threat that we see is that we almost imagine that all text is some form of social media these days, right? Everything's in the form of an article. Well, it didn't have to be articles. Like the early I think pioneers of computing didn't think that we would be still writing in article format, right? There would be no value in that. You could get just as much information across with some SQL-like words that are also functions, and then there you go. That's a bit of a tangent. Go ahead.
End note for the future on that one. On the very last point there, I think at least Doug with his journal felt that having articles were really, really important because it is a statement. It is something said and published into the world or for that community. However, he also had a very simple and very robust versioning system. You know, once something is in the journal, you can never change it. If you upload something with the same name, it becomes version 2. And version 2 is aware of version 1, stuff that we have messy today, right? So,
Right.
you know, but this
Yes.
is the kind of discussion we should have. So, you know, I'm not arguing with you, I'm saying we should. But also, and especially to, another thing that they came up was the idea of doing interviews or talks. Like we were very lucky to have Barbara here a few weeks ago. And Rafael has also been pushing on the podcasts side of things. A few people do actually watch these videos more than are in this group, which is seriously bizarre. But if we had, because, okay, so one of the suggestions was that there are 4 weeks in a month. That means there's actually 8 different slots. So we could use all of them differently for a theme. It may get messy, or maybe we just do every Friday is something or Monday is something. So we could have invited speakers, and all we would discuss that session would be that person's presentation. Right, and that would then be a YouTube or a podcast worth, at least some of them, be worth listening to. So
Right, and that, you go ahead.
No, that was that.
Yeah, so that's the idea of the meetings, and that's something also to talk about and make bets on. I think it would be good to keep that at least early on. Try and think about those as separate from the newsletter, so because the newsletter is going to be hard enough to keep on a kind of a regular schedule. Some of the easiest ideas would be taking segments, poignant segments from the volumes of Future of Text, and just publishing that part of it. Hey, here's a new way to think about the future of text.
Yeah, that's what Rafael is doing with Laura on Twitter and Instagram.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so we're really going through that, and it's a really good trial to see how the workflow is. So to integrate that into something bigger. When the moon landing anniversary was, I made a little bit of a Twitter bot that tweeted live updates. Unfortunately, I made a little mistake in there, but you know, that's just who I am. But the idea of subscribing to a historical feed, not to do too much of a sideline here, but imagine you're interested in the Battle of the Somme, right? And that period is coming up. You get email, text, or Twitter updates live from the commanders on the field. So you get a sense of the timing and everything.
I love that. I subscribe to a couple of those regarding World War II.
Yeah, there are so many things that can be done like that. So maybe we could take the timeline out of the book and put that in. So we have maybe each email, because you talked about 3 different things. Each newsletter could have, you know, just not today or even that week, but, you know, in 1100 BC, blah, blah, blah. One historical thing. And then the next thing could be a bit from the book. And then it could be upcoming thing, join us talking to Barbara, for instance. So that we do that little nugget of, you know, when you open these, it's going to be one little tiny thing you can read immediately without burning too much sugar in your brain.
One of the things that we didn't get into yesterday, but I think it's important to bring up to the group and not necessarily resolve right now, but it would be to figure out what we mean by text, which sounds very obvious at the front, but I'll give you an example. I can very easily slip into the future of interfaces, right? So I have a vision of an interactive version of a Netflix. There's one experiment that they did that was sort of a choose your own adventure, but I see it way more in depth where I, you know, there's a documentary that I want to watch, but get rid of all the reenactments, just give me the facts and chunk it down to 10 minutes. I want the 10-minute version of this multi-series documentary and those settings, right? So I can go at all in on that, but that's not text, right? So there's something about that we know immediately that's not what we're talking about. And so it would be good to kind of almost perhaps some sort of constitution to kind of say what one of the things we're talking about that is with text is that anybody can do it, you know?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Other rules like that.
We talk about video and pictures, but it does take a bit of effort. Rafael, I see you have your hand, and I'm sure you have many things, especially with a yellow color-coded pen with everything you're wearing. But I have to mention a quick thing on the whole video thing. I sent in a proposal to the DVD forum many years ago about having different scenes that set on random. Because you know that joke, I bet you $5 that horse is going, and they're watching a video, that horse is going to trip. I bet you $5 it won't. Horse trips. I can't really take your money. I've seen this movie before. They're like, yeah, so have I. I didn't think you'd be stupid enough to do it twice. Right?
I haven't heard that. That's great.
But if you imagine that you did that on purpose, so you have a movie and you edit it, but even though some of the shots are exactly the same length, exactly the same dialogue, but you do a slightly different take. A lot of great movies you want to watch again, and it's random, so you get a little bit of life into it. That could be fun, right?
Yeah, and I think all this stuff is going to be possible as we get more automated, with deep fakes and procedurally, developed scenes and things. But to reiterate, we need to talk about, or I would like to flesh out what are those parameters, what are those boundaries of what is interface, what is machine learning, what is text? When we talk about text, are we talking about text that is also generated, enabled, helped by some kind of AI? Or is it, no, text is the thing that you have to intend, that you think about and you put down, right? You see what I mean? Like really decomposing what text means so that we can define any future publications with that in mind.
I think we need to do that, and I think we need to be broader than before, but now I'd love to hear Rafael.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, that was me going on.
Okay, so I agree with a lot of things that Alan mentioned as well. I like to see text as a foundation for pretty much everything that is in the world, and I think that's interesting for people. Because it brings them closer to the importance of text. So I did a small workshop here in the studio with the trainees from the other company. There's 4 trainees in total. Interns, I think is a better word. And they're like around 20, 21 years old. And I did an introduction to the discussions that we have about text using just one very simple example, which is text related to books. And I showed them that, pretty much everything that we deal with is text in some way or another. So when you mention, photos or videos, those are also texts. So if I open a photo in a text editor, I can see the text behind the photo, which is, the mapping of the pixels and the colors and everything like that. And if I edit the text, it edits the image, it breaks the image and you get all of these artifacts, which is very interesting. And even video, 1 second of video can be 30 frames per second. Each frame is an image is text. So breaking down the medias that we have and showcasing that text is in the background always, creating all of these things that we see was quite a revelation for them because they had no idea. And also when we talk about text in the context of everything we see in products, things have dimensions. Dimensions is text. Things have properties, and these properties, somebody specified or sent these these words to make it to have it produced. So everything ends up being text in one way or another. And the idea that I was proposing to them is that if we make text better, bringing that idea of once text knows what it is, then things will be more contextual and more and understand the possibilities of itself. It was quite, they were like extremely interested, and it changed their whole point of view because everybody deals with text every single day. Like you mentioned, in the context of social media, either we're tweeting or we're sending messages on WhatsApp or everywhere. It's very rudimentary because we're using like 2 thumbs on an interface, sending messages across, but all of that conversation could be a lot richer, either finding, or interacting with it or extracting things from it. So I'd love to see text in that newsletter perspective or videos, explaining text as this foundation where, everything is text, and showing the panorama of text, where text is mostly applied and where has text been augmented, and then talking a little bit about chatbots, a little bit about machine learning and all of those things, but mostly bringing it to the point where we're getting people curious about the possibilities, no matter where they choose to use it. And I would personally stay away from talking a lot about apps, because that always goes down the same discussion, and there's so many people doing that already.
Right.
And I don't feel like that's our our focus. I feel like it's getting people interested in text in the general form.
Yeah, that's fantastic. 2 points on that. So, okay, let me rewind. It's going to be 3. One example of what's missing in the tools conversation for tools for thought is, for instance, the very difficult problem of how to categorize things, or, what is a category versus what is an entity? Like this whole problem of text versus taxonomy versus words. Those are topics that get completely skipped over because they're inherently difficult. If there was a group out there that was interested in talking about ways to not just solve the problem, but ways to become fascinated with the problem, I think that would gain quite an appreciative audience. The other side is that point 2, this could be the kind of thing that we don't actually get to resolve, but we decide, hey, right now we want to talk about text as if it was code, or text as if it was advertising, or words and the complexity of words themselves and their multi-phasic whatnot, and just sort of recognize that this has all these different facets, and we're just going to focus on how interesting this one portion is.
And language as well, text as different.
Yeah,
languages.
exactly. Because it does all boil down to that. SQL is a beautiful language in its own way, and it was meant to be the end all be all computer language that we could speak with and command with. The thing that I would caution, this is point 3, is UX, the world of UX. It's gotten to a point that in the world of UX, which is pretty much my home, I had one of my directors even say, like, UX is everything, everything is UX. And he's not wrong, but that isn't helpful, right? And that's a lot of the reason why I think UX is, as a discipline or as a profession, is in kind of a bad spot right now, because it bleeds into everything. And so someone can't represent themselves as, this is what I do. The same thing happened with information architecture, where it got boiled down as, oh, you're just coming up with words for a menu. That's what I'm paying you for. No, it's far more, in depth than that, but it gets watered down. And so we want to recognize our curiosity and the way that it spreads and gets wide, but also try to put some waypoints around so that we can say, hey, we're getting out of the area, and we're going to talk about this over here, but this is still, there's this, I don't even know how to finish that sentence. So
I had an experience recently with a professional, quite young, who was doing some UX work on some related project, and it was absolutely horrific. This person was totally fine, but the way this person had been taught was very much salesy. We need to put a wireframe here, and we need to optimize for the SEO there, and it's just like, it didn't seem to be, it seemed to be very kind of blocky talk. But then when I got my master's in this stuff, the head of the department did a bit of history and said, actually, no, that is not what happened. I'm talking about people I know intimately. And she said, it's not my fault. I'm just reading out of a book.
Yeah, right. And so it's somehow in the last 20, 30 years, we've really dipped, maybe it's always been a part of American culture, we've dipped into solutionism. So we only want to read about how to do things. And we have very little patience for, hey, isn't this an interesting problem? It's much deeper than you thought. that leads to a world where you have Web3 enthusiasts who think we could just attach the chain to words and now we've solved all these problems. I got into a little thing on Twitter about this where I think everyone in this room will identify with me on this, that like, if you've heard of Gava Guy, that was the thought experiment, I believe by Quine, or the logical positivists, that said like, if there's a, let's assume that there's a tribe and they call the thing that we think is a rabbit, they call it a Gava Guy. Okay, so what do they mean by Gava Guy? On the surface, it's just a rabbit. But if they use a rabbit as food, then they're actually not talking about the furry pet-like thing that jumps around. They're talking about the parts of the thing that we're going to eat that they happen to be together at this moment. That's a Gava Guy, you know? And so even though it's the same entity, it has all these different meanings. That could also be meaning the thing that jumps and referring to the motion. So that could be Gava Guy.
It's not the
Those
same
kinds of
entity.
intercepting the problem space is what I think is really fascinating.
It's not
Yeah.
the same entity, it's the same intersection point. But anyway, that is the kind of discussion we need to have, argue over that. Like one of my best friends, he said, you know, that's stretching the point. I said, you can't stretch a point, that's a line. But anyway, we do need to get below, and I'm sure that's where Mark is heading with his hand.
I'll try and be very quick. Just two things. It's, well, I'm drawing some more lines, isn't it? One thing I thought listening to Alan speak just now is, so maybe one of the things that we're doing, and not necessarily with deliberate intent, but is almost an outcome of what we're doing, is actually mapping what the text space is. I'm using map with a very small m. I mean, I am thinking of some sort of something visual, but I would hesitate to even guess what that might be, because as I think I may have alluded to in something put in the chat earlier, I mean, what we don't want to do is to have a basically a rubber band we just stick around lots of disparate things that don't mesh. Both the fun and more importantly the value comes out of people being able to look outside these little boundaries. So, oh crikey, what I do actually, yeah, interacts with that, or I can learn something from that. And the other thing that sort of went through my mind was when you're talking about you know, categories. I think the really interesting thing, part of the problem here is sort of a two tribes thing, is that at one and the same time, most of the people understand less of the technology that's at play here, want all these affordances, but they basically want it to be magic. They want it to just work, and they don't want to invest any effort in achieving the magic behind it. And this plays also really badly against the problem. Well, sometimes to sort of illustrate something, you've got to show it. And then you have a world that's sort of saying, well, if you've spent any money on an app, you know, it's got to make a boatload of money. This is your primary thing. So stop trying to solve problems, start trying to make money. And these things get put together. So one of the things on the sort of aspect of categories is maybe kindling, you know, just kindling a more, again, cross-disciplinary or cross-experiential or cross-viewpoint view of this. Because what I sort of have seen in a number of iterations of people dealing with categories and tags and all this sort of thing is, on one side a very hard-edged technical solution, which is a practical attempt to get to grips with it, and on the other hand, people saying, well, I'll tell you if it's okay when it's done. And then after someone's labored greatly on this, saying, yeah. And by the way, I've just seen this other really cool thing that's quite different, and it's none of that is helping us get to this. So if we're able to foster people to start talking about these connections and these categories, because such categorization leans back onto the point in having addressability. We sort of have solved, we can make things addressable now in most digital contexts. What we haven't solved is addressing the right things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it all does play together. And I'll shut up at that point.
All right. So the thing is of how to divide all of this. To me, it really comes down to, I am a solution-focused person, but I think in a different way from what you talked about, Alan. So I'm glad you used that language. I think that learning for learning self is whatever, it's a personal thing. And so many people are doing it well. I mean, even on TikTok, I just learned what a parsec is today. There are so many amazing media for learning about the universe and people. And, what do we need at the end of the day? We need a bit more empathy, all that stuff. It's a very human side. So when it comes to this community, I'm not sure if text itself should be the core boundary. I think what the core boundary should be is how can we learn stuff that'll make a difference to the world in a positive way? And I think that goes from a student writing a paper, because they're learning something to put in their head, but also to produce something for a teacher. I think it also goes for a community learning how to communicate better. It doesn't really matter, but yes, it will be grounded in text because this is what text does. So if there is, I guess in a way I'm talking slightly about the seriousness of it, but I'm also saying we shouldn't be gray and boring, of course. I'm wondering more about, if someone wants to come in, okay, first of all, another thought. Product demos, maybe we allow them, but it has to be about how it works with another product. So you can't just show one product, right? So it has to be about the whole building of the ecosystem. And upfront, there has to be a few questions. Mark has been pestering us about this, and I think he's right. What is it for? What is, that stuff has to be written to us before people present. It has to be something like, we have built this widget in order to help people solve problems in this way. So it can't just be a neater way of moving stuff about.
No, but that's back onto the sort of the salon aspect, I assume, right?
Yes, and I think, Rafael, I saw your eyebrows move there. Alan brought up the idea of calling some of these a salon rather than open office hours. I think he's right on track, and I know you agree with that. That is right up your street. Yeah, I think salon things are very useful. I mean, the Future of Tech Symposium last year, I think, was a huge success because of the breakout rooms.
Yeah, that sounds good.
No. I'm just saying that, getting people together who are passionate about something and having basically a structure so you don't go way too off on a tangent. I think that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Actually, another useful thing that, just to reprise for those who weren't here yesterday, that was something that came out from, and it's Alan, if I recall, it was you who raised it, which is this point of also saying when we look and we talk about text, is just resurfacing where some of these things come from. So some of these things we take as certainties, A, weren't certainties, and B, probably didn't arise as a solution to the problem we, as the sort of affordance we see them now. And I think that's actually quite interesting for those learning who up to that point will have been told with certainty, one of these is this shape, it has the following bits in it. And the answer is, well, none of those were erasing certainty at the time. And which allows for interesting reflection of saying, so how much of the stuff that I'm using really needs to be here, or how much is it there because if I don't do it, someone's going to shout at me because it doesn't look familiar to them. So, and that should, spark people's interest in saying, okay, so yeah, well, what is it fixing? What's really useful, and what's more, what's useful now as opposed to 100 years ago or 100 years in the future?
Yeah, no, exactly. What can we get rid of is also useful. Now, one thing we need to keep in mind is that in 1 hour and 7 minutes, everything will change. Apple's releasing a new series of M1 laptops. Right, and considering I have the first one, the 13 Pro, the speed difference between this and everything else is literally night and day. It's actually a new medium. I would call it a new medium. And today, you guys who use the bigger machines, because I'm trying to be like my users and use the 13-inch, you will have it. So in terms of what can be physically done in 1 hour will be not the same generation as before. So we should. It really is, isn't it? It is bizarre. Like live text. You all know about live text in the Apple world now, right? Select text in a picture. Yeah, you select text in any picture and you select it as text.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to butt in real quick and say, I'm going to put on my product manager hat and get back to the newsletter and reiterate a couple things. I'm going to present this as a possible direction, not that, this is what I think at the moment. We can go different ways. I think personally, I think that the newsletter should not be trying to solve the problems or be necessarily the same the same way that we kind of get abstract the way we do in these talks. I think that the newsletter, at least and if it helps, think of it as MVP newsletter version 1 should be almost like a commodity, right? Like, does anybody remember the marriage rhyme, the something borrowed, something, what is it? Something old, something new.
Do something borrowed, something blue.
Right. So even if it was as simple as like a newsletter is going to have something old, something new, something borrowed, something, those are the 4 sections, right?
Yeah.
And then like every week there's like, okay, we got a quote. It's old, you know, from I don't know, Bertrand Russell, whatever. And we got something blue, meaning something sad, and then something new and innovative, you know, to like, when I think of a newsletter that's actually feasible, I think of it in those terms as it's almost something that we're not proud of. It's just, at least it's regular. And then we can always have a better version. We can have other things later on.
Yeah, you have my full support on all those points. I see Rafael has his hand up. Just really briefly, because to give you proper time. First of all, the reason it's so important with what's happening in an hour is what we've been saying for a long time. We have 21st century computers on our desks, and we're using it for almost nothing. So one of those things in those 4 messages really has to be, can't we expect more? That's why I'm highlighting that. Secondly, maybe on Friday we dedicate to structuring this newsletter. And yes, you're right, we keep it separate from these talks, but we do mention them at the bottom. It's like, coming up, so-and-so, come in if you want. But of course, I don't know what it'll be like on Friday. I will be a new man because on Wednesday we're seeing Hamilton. Anyway, Rafael.
Yeah, so in the context of both either the newsletter or the salons, we should put in some effort to creating the structure beforehand so that we have a timeline to just crunch through.
Yeah.
So for the newsletter, for example, we can think, you know, what's this newsletter going to look for the next 3 months at least? That way we already have the structure, and then we just have to, you know, write the content, and we have, you know, a timeline to follow, and that makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah.
For the salons, I also like the idea, from my experience going to a bunch of those, is basically have, you know, 3 questions for an hour, and basically the whole conversation circles around these 3 things, and these 3 things tend to be either complementary, but sometimes just 1 question will be enough to have people talking for an hour. And in that discussion, you know, I think it has to be a little lower level, because, for example, Notion, the app Notion, you know, they've been talking about Ted Nelson, you know, since the beginning. And how many people had never heard of Ted Nelson, and now they heard of it because of Notion's big user base and the blog posts they published. And I really like that idea of, you know, showing that a lot of work has been done in the past to get to where we are. Yes. And, you know, it was, you know, a life's work for Ted Nelson to, you know, and Notion is now implementing, you know, one version of it, of possibility that was influenced by him. So yeah. I like both the way of showcasing people that came before us, but also showcasing what is being done nowadays with, you know, these seeds of thought that came from way back when.
Agreed. Also dead branches. Ideas that also died on the vine back then, but could be could make complete sense now because we're in a different landscape.
Yeah.
Adam, I got to know who we're looking at here.
Very cute.
Oh, you got the gorilla tripod. Oh, she's doing well.
Yeah, it's useless for cameras, but good for kids. So this is Elin.
Hello.
Hey,
hello, Elin.
Yeah, similar to Helen, I guess.
Okay, Ellen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great to meet you. Hi.
Hi.
I still have earphones to not.
Oh, so she can't hear you.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So on this, yes, Rafael, to everything. A couple of things. We need to plan this, and that's why we're going to announce it on the 9th of December, and we will have until January to actually execute. So we should have a Google spreadsheet or something shared to do this planning. No question about that. Also, as you know, some of you, my brother is a theater director. He's just amazing. And the inspiration I take from the theater is what emotion should people feel when? Even when my wife and I got married, at what point during the ceremony should they be happy? When should they be somber? All of that stuff, right? So for the
that's user
newsletter,
experience. Sorry, that's also user experience.
yeah, no, it is exactly that. It is pure user experience. It really is, okay? Because we want, I hope you agree, we want that when they read this brief newsletter, that they feel inspired that something good can happen, right? And when they go to these salons, at the end, they also should feel there's a community of people working on what they also think is important, right? That's our mission. It's to fill people with hope, right? While
Like they've
highlighting
watched Alexander,
Hmm?
like they've watched Alexander Hamilton, Frode.
Yeah.
And I'll dig in on to emphasize the inspired. I'm not interested in just inspired. So like I want to dig into that more. Like for instance, I think even what Rafael was talking about, there's a kind of inspired where you leave and you go, wow, people have been working on this a long time, or the world is so much bigger than I thought it was before I opened this.
Yeah.
You know, those kinds of feelings of inspiration, but also maybe feelings of
Urgency.
at times. Oh, wow, we have lost. You know, there was a way that people communicated that we can't do anymore, and it's like thinking of media as a endangered species.
I keep thinking of libraries because like a lot of effort has been put into libraries and they have a lot of things figured out, but it hasn't, followed with the times, and it's a big burden for me.
It blows my mind that both Bill Gates and Edison essentially dropped out of school, at least with Edison, because they fell in love with the libraries, and they just stayed in the libraries and read everything.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. And Frode, I was inspired by Hamilton, just so you know.
Yeah, no, yes, I mean, inspired, yes, but inspired in a specific way, Alan. I do agree. But the thing is, for most of my life, intellectual life, I felt very, very lonely trying to just talk to people about this. And because of you guys, I do not feel like that anymore. And that is important because I've been sitting in Singapore at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning with jet lag at a Starbucks in the middle of the street, writing grand theses of how to change the world to absolutely no effect other than maybe refining my thinking a little bit. Here I get to argue with people who are thoughtful. We're all ignorant in many areas, and this is a safe space to be that. So that's very good. So when I'm talking about feeling hopeful, is that yes, this aspect of helping people solve problems and communicate better, people are actually looking at it. And it's not just a sales pitch, and it's not just a French philosopher, with due respect to the French. It is action focused and action towards understanding and so on. But I have to add a dimension to that, and that is, even though with my son, I can walk down the street and do something out of a picture book and tell him how to behave, give him a moral story and all of that, and I love doing that. We can't, short of making a new religion and having a new Jesus, Messiah, or whatever it might be, I don't think we can really tell people how to behave. A lot of this, it would be nice in some ways, right? It would be, Rafael, don't start singing, it would be nice. But what we can do is people who are, if you look at a spectrum of evildoers here, very few of them in actuality, and then struggling, dog-like, to save the world here, most people in the middle, if we can help them just move the needle a little bit so that when they have a spark of questioning or spark of inspiration, they are enabled to do something more, right? If they are reading something on social media and they can question whatever it is, that's, so yes, these discussions are really like the core, but we want the people part of the discussion to build tools and other things to make that level of augmentation just jump a little bit. I mean, just to continue that point, just think of American elections, because we all know about America more than our own countries, right? Just think about some of the elections, the small percentage points between getting a lunatic or some relatively sane person into office. If we actually manage to empower the swing voters a little bit, that's huge.
I think you're right about the feeling. Well, first off, not feeling alone is amazing. And then also the feeling of and maybe this is slightly political on my part, but I tend to think that even with all the technology that we have and all the news that we hear, that there's an inevitability to everything. That technology is inevitably going the right direction, or the climate is inevitably tanking, right? And so if a feeling could be, hey, sometimes the experts, be it in the form of technologists or whatever, aren't necessarily any smarter than us, you know, and therefore can miss a lot of obvious things. And stories where people have come in and bridged together two things like Edison and the phonograph, that, you know, before that time, or even the story of the maser, which is amazing. The guy who invented the maser told von Neumann about it, told Niels Bohr about it, and they're like, no, that's impossible. You must have something wrong. We've already described the uncertainty principle. Therefore, something like a maser is impossible. And he didn't know or really care about the uncertainty principle. He just got the damn thing to work. You know, and so stories like that are also great too.
They need to be there. But Alan, you actually hit upon something fundamentally super, very important. My friend Bjørn Bure, Norwegian, wonderful super genius, who will all meet him at some point. He made me read at least the beginning of a book called The Road to Unfreedom. It's about fake news, how modern fake news started in Ukraine. It's actually quite interesting. But the really interesting point was, in the beginning, he says there are two kinds of people politically. What's that?
That's a similar concept. This is how they tell me the world ends, and it's about the growth of cyber warfare and all that sort of stuff. Go ahead.
So that's one thing. But what I felt was really interesting, he doesn't cut the world into liberals and Republicans or whatever like that. What he says is that two types of worldviews. One is the kind of people who thinks that things go in cycles. You know, prosperity will come, wars will come, and then they go back again. And then there are these people who think that things will just steadily, with bumps, get better. Because you were talking about technology will get better. Those second people are basically the ones running Western liberal democracies at the moment. They believe that if we invest in social systems and education, countries will get better. Look at Norway and Sweden, very much like that. Because we think that if we spend another £10 per child in education, things will get better. More people will be educated. People who think things are cyclical do not believe that. They believe that there's no point. Protect yourself, because things are going to get better for a while and then going to get worse. There's a status quo in the world. It was just like, whoa, huge eye-opener point. The way you basically view the possibilities of the world even changes whether you can even be part of this dialogue. If you feel one way or the other, I mean, if someone of the other point of view, so to speak, enters this world that we have here, they will think we're just dreamers, not good dreamers, but just dreamers. It's an important point.
Agreed. That could easily veer out of the topic of future of text. But at least the thoughts I'm having have more to do with statistics and the way that misleads people. Is that text? I don't know. You know.
Well, the thing is that the reason I'm hung up on text is partly when you're speaking. Yes, Siri and all of that is useful, and you know, you get the human emotion. But when you're reading, you come across something you're not sure about, you can instantly pause and think without losing the rest of it. You know, I know that's been around forever, but it's so important. You can't do that with a movie, and you can't do that if you're listening to someone. Just to be able to stop and think.
So I'll throw this out there before I have to jump. It might be more liberating. The question for the group is, are we talking about the future of text, or is the future of text almost like a band name that, you know, that band writes whatever, you know, talks about whatever, you know, the musical Hamilton was about Hamilton, but it was about so much more, you know? Is the future of text almost like a code word for everything that we're talking about in that feeling? And it's sort of still structured in a very simple, straightforward way, but more open-ended in what is addressable? Or is this ultimately returning to text is something to focus on.
Since you mentioned Hamilton, so once you see Hamilton and you become a complete absolute addict like me, one of the things you will do and go on YouTube and look up Hamilton, and you will come across things like the trust me, it's relevant. The guy doing the sound when it's live, right? He has to concentrate 90% concentration the whole time. Every single cast member has a microphone on a slider, has to go up and down. Even in the one part of the song that's an echo has to be done live, right? So the amount of training to get that person to do that job is amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And if you talk to the violinist, easily can understand, you got to, it takes forever to learn. But there is a place where violinists can go to learn violining, right? We need to do that for text.
I completely agree.
We need to be the space where people can go and be completely text nerding like mad. If they want to stretch it into a physical visual map or whatever, I don't care. But as long as it isn't, I liked Hamilton, the popcorn was nice too. But if it is the bit about the bit, I'm going to nerd out like absolutely mad.
The journey for me has been, I started questioning education. And then from education, I discovered that learning is more important because you have, freedom and curiosity to go after the things that you want to learn about. And then taking another step back, I figured that, if I'm going to be learning, I need access to good information and organized information. And then take another step back, information is text. So once we go back, all of these steps, and we make people understand that once we make text better, everything else that derives from it is a lot better. That's for me what's the most important for people to understand, and bringing it.
Okay. Yeah, agree. That's awesome. It's great that
we're enabling we're enabling a space also between. I mean, I was struggling when people said, "But everything's about narrative," and you're off into the world of lit crit and stuff, and it's fine. But it's niche. It doesn't cover all of what text does, and nor is it just a matter of the ones and zeros on the page. And this sort of thing seems to me because there is all this other stuff that doesn't fit into anything. It doesn't have one home.
Yeah,
and it's surrounded by lots of things that just want to tell you that nothing outside their world matters. And I fundamentally don't believe that's so in the nature of text.
We've got to make sure that we keep the L in learning. Otherwise, all we end up with is.
So something to think about for the next time we talk about this. I'm going to right now just propose a structure for the newsletter that can be voted down, destroyed, or whatever, but it's something to. So I'm going to go with something old, something new, something borrowed, something true. Something old, a book quote. So something, could be the beginning or a part of the road to unfreedom, or something from Makers of the Word, something that's out there that someone can buy that book because here's this nugget of thought that's interesting. Something new, something that has to do with technology or techno, socio-techno, or, economics, techno, that crossroads. Something that's sort of pertinent now. Boom, boom. Something borrowed. I would think that could either be similarly a quote, but maybe something from an ancient white paper, something from Bertrand Russell, something from Quine, whatever, or borrowed in the sense of let's take a word and let's break it down and show how this is a very interesting, multifaceted word. We used the example the other day or yesterday, convention, so similar to what Mark, your wife's exercise, right? Like, here's a word, let's explode it or draw it out in some way and create a new association. Whatever, I'm not tied necessarily to that. And then something true is kind of like ending out on a statement that is inspirational, perhaps, but something that we feel, not something that is perhaps speculation, but something that is just like. Anyway,
I think that's beautiful. I'm not a big fan of the word true, so we'll have a discussion over that.
Something constant.
However, are you thinking weekly, monthly, daily, what?
Not daily, and not monthly, so weekly.
Okay.
How about fortnightly?
Or
fortnightly.
Or what we can do, if we do a spreadsheet with this and we have a tiny bit of tech around it, we could do it every weekday, but one topic a day. So you can either choose to get it as a weekly digest and what you said, or Monday something borrowed, Tuesday something blah blah, because it may be nice snippets. So if it's in
If
a
it's automated, then I could understand daily. I just think that that's a massive burden. Weekly at least has a regular cadence that you don't forget about it. Because monthly, I think is it's going to drop off of people's radars. I could say that for myself. Monthly newsletters, they wind up getting pushed to the trash
and don't drop on a Monday or Friday.
I just think we need to do a little bit of text tech with this. So you know, when you get the email, there should be a link to click to open this on the web to see the weeks in one or whatever. So, you know, we can have fun with that, things to discuss. But we're all happy with the general notions of what Alan said, right? Okay, so we will on Friday we'll think more about about this. Some people have said they want to do some presentations on the future of text, and they keep changing dates. So I may suddenly say, "Oops, I forgot," and here is so and so. But other than that, our main order of business is how to expand the community in an inclusive but focused manner using some sort of a newsletter. Yeah.
And don't forget to follow the Future of Text on Twitter and Instagram, please.
Yeah, good. And at some point on TikTok.
Yes.
Can't wait to see Frode dance.
Okay, what you have to do is search for Andy's choreography on YouTube, where he explains just a little bit. Every single movement of every body part means something. And further, I know you have to go, but I have to tell you this human story. Andy Blankenbrüel, I can't even pronounce his last name. When he got the job to do this, his daughter got leukemia. And she was dying. They had to move out of their house, move into the mother-in-law's house, where as she was undergoing treatment, he would have to practice downstairs in the basement, all the choreography for all of Hamilton in a basement that was so tall, when he was standing with his arms up in the air, he would touch the ceiling. He managed to do the work, and right before premiere, she recovered. For more human stories, tune in next week. There are some horrific and beautiful realities around this. Anyway, good to talk. In 40 minutes, we're all going to find out that we're going to be even broker with dreams of new laptops.
Thank you for reminding me I'm about to empty the piggy bank again.
Yeah, you're going to be so screwed.
Take my money.
All right. See you on Friday. Yeah, let's keep thinking about this. Alan, please have a look at the draft letter thing, and feel free to edit like mad or suggest or send back or whatever. No rush. We'll figure something out.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
See y'all.
Bye.